Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mastering Commercial Real Estate podcast. I'm your host, Cory Mortensen. Today's guest is Jonathan Nichols with Apogee Capital. John was an aerospace engineer before making the leap to multifamily real estate investing and syndication in 2018 with his wife, Paula. Since then, together they have acquired over 400 units in just a few years and have been limited partner investors on over 1,000 units as well. With experience in both passive and active investing aspects of commercial real estate, we have a real treat for you today. Jonathan, welcome, and thank you for being on today.
Thanks for having me, Cory. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, introduce yourself to the listeners, and let's get started in how you got started in real estate.
Yeah, 100%. I'll try to make it short and sweet. I grew up with a pretty traditional American upbringing, go to school, get your college degree, get a job, start saving in your 401k. And then, one day when you're 65, you're going to be magically ready for retirement. So that's the road that I headed down. As you've already mentioned, I worked as an engineer for about 8 or 9 years full time. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, my wife Paula and I got married. And shortly after we got married, she informed me that we needed to find a hobby together. And I was like, a hobby? Like what kind of hobby are we gonna do? Play golf or, I'm not really that kind of person. So I didn't know what we were gonna do. But shortly after that, I read the book that I'm sure many of your listeners have, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that's what really sort of lit the spark for me on thinking about investing and specifically in real estate. And so I said, hey, what if we, kind of make our hobby doing real estate investing together? And then we'll have a hobby that makes us money instead of spending. And so my wife, like you, Cory, so she was a finance major at slightly less good school than Texas A&M. That's where we met. And she also studied a little bit about investment banking and such. So she definitely had an interest in this, I guess, is what I'm saying. So our strategy was really pretty simple. We were going to save up some money and just go buy a house and rent it. That was it. It was pretty simple. And then shortly after that, though, she began to kind of dive into numbers and look at stuff along with myself. And she said, hey, what if we do a house hack? And we don't just do any house hack, but we do it on a fourplex. And so we left our comfortable, nice home, moved to a fourplex several months later, and renovated it while we lived there over the next year, and began to actually rent the units as short-term rental. Think Airbnb and Vrbo, from that fourplex, and it was very successful. And so we bought another property and started doing the same thing. And we moved out of that property and, rented the other unit. So that was really our start, was, buying residential properties and renting them out as short-term rental units. It worked very well for us. But after about 2 or 3 years, we realized, hey, this is something that we want to pursue full time. We want to make a business out of this. And so we went to our local RIA meetup and talked to a few investors who we knew were, full-time investors, and asked them, what real estate strategies are you doing? And the overwhelming response was multifamily. That's how we were able to scale and get out of our W-2 jobs. And so, we started learning about multifamily. We eventually joined a mentorship program, went through that, did our first deal, then our second, third. And fast forward today, we're both full-time investors here in Dallas, Fort Worth area. We focus on syndications both in Texas and Oklahoma markets. And we're actually now also both coaches in the program that we went through as mentees several years ago. So that's our story in a nutshell.
Perfect. So let's dive into kind of the nuts and bolts on why you chose Oklahoma. Obviously, very familiar with the Texas market, but I personally don't know very much about the Oklahoma market. What's going on in the Oklahoma market that has your eyes fixed to it?
Yeah, so there's really kind of two things. I get that question a lot. One is I'm actually an Oklahoman by birth, so I was born in Oklahoma. Almost all my family lives in Oklahoma City, so I do know the market pretty well. Ironically, all of our deals that we're general partners on are actually in Tulsa. And so that, a little bit of learning there. I didn't spend as much time in Tulsa growing up, but we had some partners who were really interested in that market, and we found a good property manager there. And so, that was definitely a piece of it. But just from an investment philosophy perspective, you kind of learn in the residential world, at least, you can invest more for appreciation. So think brand new property that, maybe cash flow is very little, but is more likely to go up in value over time, or you can invest for cash flow. And so, Texas, in my opinion, has really become more of an appreciation market. You look at where a lot of deals pencil out to, and it's not a high cash flow proposition. And so Oklahoma is not a straight cash flow market, but I think it offers a good balance between a market that is likely to appreciate and one where you can find deals that cash flow. And so all of our deals there are cash flowing extremely well. And I feel like it sits a lot more in that zone that most people think of when they think of multifamily. And hey, I'm going to get a sizable distribution every 3 months and have a property that's going to appreciate over time.
Gotcha. So is your investment thesis more of a value add? Is it a turnkey, B class, C class?
Yeah, so I would say value add. If you underwrite a lot of deals, you kind of learn that without some kind of value add in your business plan, it's hard to get the returns that investors are expecting to see. But I would say, what's interesting, or what I would encourage new investors to think about is all the different ways you can add value to a property. So let me give you an example. We bought a deal. Most of our deals are like C plus or B type deals, like many value add syndicators. But we have one deal that I would call an A minus. So it's a 2012 build. It's in College Station, Texas, which is ironically where A&M is, where we went to school. And on that deal, there was no value add from the traditional sense of going in, renovating units and pushing rents on that. But this property was owned by like a mom and pop who self-managed. And when I say self-managed, I mean did everything on the property. And so they basically were just concerned about being 100% occupied. And so you have this really nice, literally luxury townhome style property that's, well below market rent, no official marketing for it. And so we found a, professional third party manager, brought them in, and we were able to push rents the first year about like 125 a unit, and the second year another 50 to 60 a unit average. And that's without any capex in those units, basically. So usually we're trying to get $100 to $200 rent bumps with capex, and we were able to get over 100 without. So all that to say, like, we're open to other types of value add, but it's just that may look a little different depending on the specific project.
Gotcha. So let's dive into your first deal and your first commercial real estate deal. Was it multifamily?
Yeah, so it was one of our Tulsa deals that we did with our partners up there. It's 100 units in this town called Pryor, which is on the outskirts of Tulsa, but it's home to one of the largest industrial parks in the country, actually. And so, think job growth, population growth, income growth, all the metrics you look for are actually contained in this small market. And so we got a lead on a 100-unit property there. My partners had already done one multifamily project. So this was their second one. And we had looked at some other deals together before. And so, they said, hey, we have this other deal. Do you want to participate? And at this time, they actually lived overseas. And so, my basically, piece of the general partnership was going to the deal, helping with the due diligence, assisting with some of the underwriting, the CapEx organization. And then, of course, raising money for the deal. We all raised money and signed on the loan. So I feel like a lot of new aspiring general partners, will look for a deal where it's like, hey, I can raise a few $100,000 and then I'm going to be like a ready to go GP. But what I encourage people to do is find a deal where you're not just raising money, but you're actively participating in the deal so that you can, learn what you need to then go and be a lead sponsor on your own deals.
Gotcha. No, that's a great piece of advice. What's another piece of advice? Because you have partners on those deals you had been co-GPs on. How did you find these partners? What was your agreement with them? What tips do you have for other people who are looking to partner and leverage other people's skills?
Yeah, I could probably talk for an hour on that, right? On partnerships. But I would say a few things. As far as, how I've found my partners, it's been very organic. I think a lot of people They try to kind of microwave success in multifamily. And when it comes to partnerships, that just means finding someone with a deal that will let them join the deal, right? But for me, it was really about meeting different people at events, at conferences. When we started multifamily was kind of the very right before the very beginning of COVID sort of time frame. And so, there were a lot of virtual opportunities for networking. And so we took advantage of those. And that's actually how I met these partners. And so getting to know people and then just as you become their friends, seeing if your values align, your investment criteria aligns, your goals align. And that takes a little bit of time, you know. I personally, Paula and I, we're both co-owners, founders of Apogee, but we really partner on a deal by deal basis because I don't want to be necessarily like locked into one group of partners. If we do a couple deals together and those deals go great, but a long term, we have other goals, then that gives sort of an open door for people to move around as they want to. So that's kind of been our partnership structure. We're very methodical in how we kind of split up deals and stuff. So it's really what value are you bringing to the deal? Um, Once again, I think a lot of newer general partners are like, well, there's three of us, we'll just split it, one third, one third, one third. But these deals, they require a lot of work. And when you start thinking about earnest money and stuff, also potentially a lot of risk as a general partner. And so I think you just have to come up with some appropriate way to evaluate who's bringing what level of money, of experience and effort to the table, and then dividing it accordingly.
Is there anything that would have you stay away from signing an agreement with a potential partner? Are there any red flags that you look out for? Anything that you've passed on in the past?
Yeah, I think the first thing is definitely integrity. I know everyone says that. Um, but the thing that concerned me the most, that I was most concerned about when I started multifamily, was this idea of using other people's investment money in investment deals I was running. It's an opportunity, but it's also a very big responsibility. A lot of our deals have been, kind of the 100 unit, $10 million type of properties. And so you think about bringing $2 to $4 million of investor capital into one of these deals, and that's a substantial amount of responsibility. And so I want to make sure that potential partners are going to, one, do everything correct from a legal perspective, right? But then also just from a moral perspective of making decisions based on what's best for the investors. And so I like to be transparent with my investors. I like to give deal structures that favor them, particularly if a deal doesn't go the way we've planned, through preferred returns, through taking the majority of our profit at the time of sale. So yeah, I want partners who kind of align with those values of protecting investors and doing what's right. Beyond that, I think it's just who do you get along with, right? A partnership in one of these deals is usually a 5-year commitment, plus or minus a couple years. And so it's kind of like a mini marriage, right? And so, there's a lot of factors that go into, who you want to marry, but one of them is definitely who do you like being with. And so I think it's the same with partnerships of, you want to be in good partnerships with people that you enjoy spending time with. So
Perfect. So on your investing insight, what has changed the most for you in terms of how you look at real estate deals from when you got started in 2018, 2019 versus now when you're currently looking at deals?
yeah, and I would say part of this is intentional. Part of it you may reduce to luck, if you will, but we've tried to be very conservative on the deals that we've done. I know everyone says that, but for example, we've only done deals as active partners with fixed rate loans. And so unfortunately, I have a lot of friends in the industry right now that are, really struggling with floating rate debt, with rate caps. But, I'm pretty blessed in the sense that like I don't have any worry about that. I know what my rates are, and we're just trucking along and trying to manage other things like insurance, taxes, things that are important and challenging, but not deal breakers. And so I think that's one thing. I because of the time we entered, I had a lot of people would be like, well, you got to get an 80% LTC loan to make these deals work. Go ahead and do it. And, being coming from an engineering background, an analytical background, I could pretty easily see that, prices correlated to the debt that's available on the market. And if you go to sell a property one day and that debt is no longer available to your buyer, you may not be exiting at the price point that you think you are. And so that was something that was always kind of a concern to me through 2020 and 2021. Um, and I'm glad that, we stuck to our guns on that, because I think it's really paid out for us. And now, we get to spend a lot more of our energy focused on acquisitions right now, when I think it's actually a pretty good time to be looking for deals, as opposed to trying to hang on to deals that, aren't doing well.
So when you are talking about risk management, which you touched on there in your statement there. So when you're looking at deals and you're being conservative, what are some of those conservative assumptions that you're making? What's those rent growth? Is it an exit cap? Go into detail about what you've changed and as far as your assumptions with your underwriting, because that's what you're focused on, right? Is on the underwriting side and the analytical.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot of things, as an underwriter, as an acquisition sort of specialist. I don't really have a title, but whatever you want to call it. There's a plethora of different assumptions that you have to think about. Everything from individual expense line items to, as you mentioned, cap rate, rent growth, occupancy, all kinds of different metrics. And you have to make a reasonable assumption for each one of those and be able to justify it. Not all assumptions are equal, though. So I would say, cap rate, it's there at the top. You have to make sure you got that one right. And if you can't dial it in perfectly, you have to be a little bit conservative on it. And so, I think that it's interesting because, the industry standard on a 5-year business plan is, hey, we're going to raise the cap rate 0.5% over, what we bought the property at, or whatever the stabilized cap rate is for that market today. And so that was the assumption a year and a half ago, when cap rates were at an all-time low in many markets. But now that they're a little bit higher, we still make the same assumption, right? So it's a bit of a game in a sense, but I think, we try to stick to things that we believe in. So, right now, for example, rent growth, it's been great the last few years. I don't believe DFW is going to have 5+% rent growth every year for the next 5 years. And so, I don't underwrite to that. I don't care what CoStar says. I don't care what other, sponsors may or may not say. I just, based on the data that I'm looking at and, historical information, I don't think that's what we're going to see. And so, I don't underwrite to that. But then it's also justifying, right? So one thing that we do in our sort of investor summaries is we'll usually do a sensitivity study of some of these key assumptions. So, that's where I go to someone and say, hey, look, we think we're going to be exiting this deal at a 5.5 cap because we're buying it at a 5 cap today, or the stabilized market value is a 5 cap. But if it were to be a 6, this is what the returns are going to look like. And if we're being overly conservative and we exit at a 5, this is what the returns are going to look like. So one thing I'm a big proponent of is educating investors and making sure they understand what they're investing in. Because one thing that was a big touch point for me when I started investing in real estate was this idea that up until that point, I had been just an investor in my company's 401k with pretty limited knowledge as far as how it works, or what the risks are, or how I should invest, or how much. It was pretty much just doing what everyone else was doing. And so I try to kind of break that mold with our investors, where not everyone has the same appetite to learn everything about the industry, but I want all investors to have a baseline and truly be sophisticated investors that understand what they're doing. So it's not just an, oh, I trust Jonathan, although I hope they do. It's a, hey, I actually like this, makes logical sense and I could explain it to someone else. So I don't know. That's kind of a bit of a whirlwind, I know, but that's probably what I would say.
No, that's perfect. And we share a similar philosophy in that, and our education of people who are doing business with us, who are our investors, our stakeholders. because I'm the same way. Some people are just fine with, oh, I trust you and you seem to know what you're talking about. Here's my money. And that's the end of it. But we really do want to educate people in what they're investing in, because one, it just helps with answering questions and covering objections, but also it makes them feel safer and they trust you more with their money, with the investment, because you are so transparent and forthcoming with the information. I mean, on our website, we've got all types of terms for commercial real estate and syndication investing, and doing the podcast, obviously. So we've got tons of resources out there for people to come in and learn. And it sounds like you're doing similar with how you're training and coaching your investors. So that's great. So let's talk more about the investor relations. When you're sourcing capital and you're having conversations with some new investors, first of all, how are you finding new investors?
Yeah, so I'd say that's, kind of a in the works sort of project for us right now. Most people, myself included, Paula and I included, you start with family, friends, and professional contacts. Maybe you do or don't have, family members that are interested in investing, friends that are interested. For us, one big reason we started in syndication is because we had family and friends who were like, hey, I want to invest in real estate. Like, I've heard real estate is great to invest in. I see y'all have done it and had a level of success, but I don't know how to do it. I don't have the time to do it, and I don't want to do it. So what are my options, And syndication is a great response to all of those questions in my mind. We almost had some investors almost asking us for opportunities before they even came. But then beyond that, it's professionals who, I worked as engineer, Paul as a consultant. We had people who maybe they already invested in real estate, or, similar story, they were interested in it, but didn't want to do it themselves. And so that's, in my mind, probably everyone's baseline of investors where you start. After that, there's kind of a few things you can do. One, and probably the most important, is do well on your projects so that those investors you have will go out and give you references and referrals, right? So we've had a number of investors who it's like, they get distributions for a year and they feel pretty happy and they say, hey, can I introduce you to my friend or my other family member or whoever? That's one great source of new investors. Another thing, and I think you probably understand this, Cory, this is why you're doing the podcast, is you need to position yourself as a thought leader in the industry. And so, a thought leader or a thought leadership platform is basically a typically virtual presence on the internet that demonstrates you are a leader in this industry and know what you're talking about. And so there's a million different ways you can do that, right? The very basic is it starts with having a good website with great information on it. That's step one. But then beyond that, you could be doing a podcast or being a guest on a podcast. I write a blog every week that's oriented towards passive investors that I've had going for about 3 years. So that's something that I do. I post a lot on social media. It's basically ways to get your name out there and people see you as someone who's an expert in the industry. Being a thought leader, and then I think probably the step beyond that for the super high net worth individuals is, building relationships with, family offices and high net worth individuals. And so that's kind of a whole new area for me that I'm exploring. I don't know that I have a lot of advice to give on it because I'm still figuring part of that out myself, but this idea that there's a lot of family offices, a lot of high net worth individuals that, they have need for good investment opportunities. They're just trying to find them. And I think the biggest secret to that is relationship building, right? It's building that trust with those people. So, you're the one that they think of when they're looking for opportunities.
Absolutely. And when you are speaking with new investors and telling them about your investments and your operations and dealing with objections, what is some of the number one objections that you get when speaking with investors about coming on and putting money into your deals?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's interesting because I would say when I'm talking with new investors, I don't get a lot of what I would call objections when you're talking one-on-one. The objections are when they don't invest, right? So no one's committing to invest the first couple conversations you have with them. It's when you have a deal that's live. Um, so I would say within that bucket of individuals, it's usually things like, well, I don't have money right now, or I don't believe in the market right now. Like, I think it's too turbulent of a time to invest. I don't like a particular market or property. Oftentimes, though, I'll say it's pretty hard to pinpoint why. People won't always come straight forward and say, "Hey, I'm not going to invest in this deal because of one, two, three." When they do, it's really useful. But I would say most of the time it's just, "Hey, I'm not interested." And for me personally, like I said, engineer background, I'm not a salesperson. So I never push anyone to invest. If someone's not comfortable, I like to know the reason why if they're willing to share it. But I'm not necessarily trying to dissuade them because I only want investors who feel very comfortable in the investment they're making. One thing I have done though, that probably is a form of persuasion is I'll say, "Hey, look, I understand on this project, you may not be interested. Could I possibly add you to the investor update list so you can get the updates from this property each month that we send out?" And so I did that on my first couple of projects. And so I had, several investors, for example, on the first deal I mentioned, who, they weren't interested at the time, but they start getting those updates, and then they get the one, 6 months later when we do our first distribution. "Hey, your distribution's on the way." And then, a couple months later, I have a project available, and they're the first ones to sign up. So sometimes just, giving it some time and letting them figure it out for themselves and just see tangibly, "Hey, this is how it works, and this is actually a viable investment opportunity," is the best way to convince someone, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip, is to have something tangible and something factual that's an example that they can see, because a lot of it is, especially if they haven't invested into syndication before, it can be something that's very unknown, very foreign to people. And so putting that in front of them in their inbox saying, "Hey, here are your actual distribute, here's how much money we're distributing this month," or
Yeah.
something like that, can go a long way for somebody who's possibly on the fence. But let's pivot to marketing and deal sourcing. So what is
Mm.
your preferred method of finding deals, and how have you gotten your deals historically?
Yeah, so we chatted a little bit about this before the beginning of the podcast, I know, and it seems that you're an expert at, direct mail and all that stuff, which is super cool. I probably should learn some of that. I tried one small direct mail campaign when I was doing residential investing and failed terribly at it, probably because I wasn't persistent, to be honest. But I've never used that in the multifamily world. So all our deals have been sourced through broker relationships off market. And so what does that mean? Probably most of your listeners know that there are commercial real estate brokers that transact over 90% of deals that trade, in any given market. And so, my goal is to get those deals where the seller is not necessarily wanting top dollar. I mean, price is always important, but they more of want a smooth transaction. And therefore, they don't want to fully market a property. And if they don't want to fully market, that means the broker gets to decide who they do and don't want to send that property to. And that's when people say off market, that's usually what they're talking about in the multifamily world. So through a broker, but a property that's not being fully marketed on their website or LoopNet or Crexy or anything like that. So yeah, I like to get a first look at those deals if I can. The key is when you have those to be able to underwrite them very quickly, because if it is a good deal, it will go fast, even if it's only sent to a handful of people. I like to often say that, you blast it out on market and you may have 100 potential buyers, as an example, that are asking questions about it. And on off market, there may only be 10, but they're going to be the 10 most qualified buyers that were out of that group of 100, right? So it's still very competitive. And so, yeah, you got to have a relationship with the brokers, first of all, to be able to get those deals. And that's a continual process. And then the second thing, you got to give feedback or an offer very quickly on them. And I would say, kind of third and final, you got to be able to see the value in deals that other people miss. Everyone knows they can go in and renovate a unit and check the comps next door and get X dollars. Like you can go pull a CoStar report or whatever and see that. So it's not difficult to figure out that piece of the puzzle. And so oftentimes that's the only piece of the puzzle people look at. But you got to start looking at other things like additional income opportunities or more efficient management. Or like the other deal I mentioned, a mom and pop ownership where the units are just organically below market rent without renovation. Stuff like that is usually what gets deals across the finish line for sponsors, not just, oh, I put in $100 and, bump the rent. I mean, excuse me, I put in a renovation project and bump the rents $100.
Gotcha. And so when you're talking about keeping up relations with brokers outside of the initial call and email of, hey, I'm looking in your market, this is my buy box, send me what you got. What are some ways that you can continue those relationships and build those relationships with brokers, new people that you're meeting on that side of the equation?
Yeah, so I talk to students about this a lot. And once again, it's one of those you can't microwave success kind of things. So I think for most people, what it looks like is taking the time to get to know those brokers. And how do you do that? Well, you can be like, hey, Mr. Broker, do you want to go eat a $15 lunch with me? I'll buy, or like, do you want to go get a coffee? And they get those types of requests all the time. And they have limited time. And so it's like, hey, I'll buy you a $15 sandwich. So like, dude, my time is worth so much more than that. So I don't know. I would say try to go a little further than that. So what can you do? One, be at places that they're at. So there are, at least in my market, there are conferences, meetups, types of commercial real estate events that brokers attend. Go to those events where they're already there. Like they've already carved out that time to be there. Go to those events. A lot of them are free. Another thing is go look at their on-market deals. So I've already mentioned every deal we've ever done has been off-market. It's very difficult to find a deal where the numbers work good and you get great returns that's on market. But you can use it as an excuse to develop a relationship with a broker. So think about it like this. I call the same broker and say, hey, I saw this listing that you have up, Pine Oaks. It's actually right down the street from me and, very much in like my buy box or my criteria. Are you doing any tours next week? Oh yeah, I've got one at, 2 on Wednesday and 3 at Thursday. Okay, can you fit me in right before or after one of those? So see what I'm saying there is like, hey, the only extra time you're carving out for me is that other 45 minutes or hour before or after the other tour. I'm not asking you make a special trip, nothing. It's just do that. And then go through the underwriting, give them feedback on the deal. And if you're remotely near the whisper price, put in an offer on the deal. Like, if it's a $7 million deal, even if you're putting in an offer that's 400K below, it's one more offer that they get to bring to their seller and be like, look, this is offer number 12 that I got for you. It makes them look good, like they know what they're doing. So basically play the game with them, and after you've done that on a couple on market deals, especially if you're a good underwriter, what will happen is you'll have had enough conversations with them where they realize you know what you're doing. And then that usually opens the door for them to send off market. So that's the long-winded way that it works for 90% of people. Let me give you one more way, and that is just go ask. So I had a student who was completely brand new to multifamily, had never underwritten a deal. And I had just started meeting with this person. He lives in the market where I do, actually. And so we were at a conference put on by a local brokerage. It's a free conference to attend. So I'm there hanging out with the brokers, doing what I just described. And he's also there attending. And he hits it up with one of the younger brokers who ironically has an off-market deal right along what he's looking at, right outside of DFW, and sends it to him that next morning. And it was actually like very close to a great deal. He put in an offer and was like this close to getting it. I would go so far to say that the only reason he didn't is he just didn't have enough organization up front in terms of property management, insurance, and all that. But it proves the point that like you don't also need 5 years of experience to get off market deals. Just go hang out with the brokers and ask for what you're looking for, you know?
Gotcha. No, those are great nuggets of advice that are practical and everybody can go out and use. For the next step in the process, once you've found a deal, you've underwritten a deal, we've talked about that on the assumption side. Now you're under contract or you're negotiating, you're starting the negotiations. What are some of the things that you're seeing or have seen sellers want that you needed to either come to their table or your table? What are some of the things that you use in negotiation to help get to your purchase price or meet in the middle and what you're seeing now today?
Wow. Yeah. Um, there's a lot of things. I feel like, when it comes to price, which usually is the number one thing that they're looking at, it kind of goes back to what I've already mentioned about the underwriting and make sure you're not missing any opportunities there. So let's just assume you've done that. You've got your best price, and it's regardless if it's the top one, it's competitive, right? Um, the next thing is like who are you as a buyer, and how can the seller know confidently you're going to close? So we're just now at a point where like we're starting to look at deals and probably not selling anything right now in this market, but like we would be selling if the market was as good as it was 2 years ago. But starting to get, a lot of BOVs, kind of get some feels for where we think deals are worth. And the thing that comes to my mind is like, it would be such a pain to sign a contract with someone, then drag it out 60 days and walk away. Like it would be a nightmare working with my property management, with my investors. I don't want that to happen. And so put yourself in the seller's shoes. They want to know that you're going to close the deal like you say you are. How do they know that? One, of course, the best thing is reputation. Like if you've closed 10 other deals before and have references from brokers, lenders, that goes a long ways. Our most recent deal we got under contract. I think we got it because we had just closed a very similar deal, had great references from lenders, from broker, and they're like, hey, this is going to get done. And then beyond that, it's like, what are the terms in your LOI or your contract? So, I am not, particularly on C class, a huge fan of hard money day one. Now, if you really want to win a deal and you're really confident about it, knock yourself out. I have done it on the nice deal that I mentioned to you. We did that, but there is, as a sponsor, a lot of risk in doing that. But you can definitely craft offers that show the seller that you're likely not to walk away. So think about things like a reduced inspection time frame, right? Like, hey, I don't need 30 days to get everything figured out. I just need 14 or 10 or whatever it is. Hey, I'm willing to do hard money day one with these 5 contingencies. Like, what are the reasons you would walk away from a deal? The roofs, sewer lines, foundation structure, environmental, title, like hopefully not a whole lot more than that. And so, it's like, hey, like I'm not going to walk away just because I don't know what I'm doing, or I just don't like the deal, or I get cold feet, or I don't have my lending in line. It's like just if there's some big unknown that I wasn't aware of on the property. So put in an offer like that. Um, Closing time frames, the faster you can close, the better. But I would actually probably be more conservative on that because you always want to give yourself an extension. So yeah, I mean, those are just a few ideas.
Yeah, and it's an art, the negotiating. It's not a science. It's not something you can put a blanket, oh, you need to do this, this, and this, and then you'll get this, this, and this. Every seller is completely different. I mean, the negotiating part is what I think is one of my specialties and my strengths, just from my
Cool.
experience with real estate sales. And it totally depends on where you need to be. First of all, figure that out. And then what is the seller? What's their situation? What is their mentality? Are they purely priced? Do they have a motive outside of that? And then you kind of work things in after reverse engineering it. And then if you really do need to put in an aggressive offer, there's a rule of thumb that I like to use. For every 3 buyer terms you have, add 1 seller term. Give them some goodwill in there. Show them that you're not just trying to rake them over the coals. Show them that you're a real empathetic person.
Yeah.
And there's a language that people can read in the offers, in the contracts that show up whether in a number or term or something like that. So I am always curious to hear what other people are doing and their approach to negotiating.
It's a great question.
Yeah. And so let's talk about your team. What does your team look like? It's you, your wife, Paula. Is there anybody else that you have in your management team outside of just the properties?
No, so Paula joined here just a couple months ago full time. We started the business together, but I went full time a year and a half ago. She did a couple months ago. And so kind of the way we divide up responsibilities, the way we see the multifamily role is you've got your acquisitions, you've got your asset management, and you have your capital raise. Those are in our mind the three sort of divisions, if you will, within the company. And so I focus on the acquisitions. She focuses on the asset management piece, and we kind of meet in the middle on the capital raise since we both have our own individual networks. So that's kind of our company in a nutshell. Obviously, we have the typical team, third party team members, attorneys, CPA. Because we're in multiple markets, we do have several different property managers. So they're all, we would consider them all a part of our team. And then our partners, right? So I already mentioned I don't necessarily have an ongoing commitment to any specific group of partners, but of all the deals I've done, it tends to be the same people that I work with over and over because I know, like, and trust them. And so, partners are definitely an important part of your team because for someone that hasn't done a deal like this, they're not easy to close. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort. And the more that you can divide and conquer, the better off you're going to be. In my opinion, you always need one person that's kind of the leader, the lead sponsor of the project. Usually it's the person that finds the deal and they're going to get the biggest chunk of the GP. But trying to do everything yourself is a recipe for failure in this industry, both from a skill set perspective and a time perspective.
Gotcha. And so do you have any plans to add any team members to facilitate some of the difficulties in capital raising or acquisitions, transaction management? What are your goals for either your team, and be interested to hear about your business acquisitions, anything like that?
Yeah, so it'd be cool if you could ask my wife Paula that question because I think she would have a different answer. My approach thus far has been through partnerships and I would say strategic relationships with vendors to be able to accomplish the things that I can't do on my own. Because she comes from a business background and worked as a consultant, has a lot more of that business structure, system, and processes type mindset. And so, she's very good at laying out, hey, this is the system, the process to accomplish it. Who can we hire or find that can do that? And so, I suspect at some point we'll wind up, hiring other people to help us with stuff. Examples could be, someone to do social media, all that type of work for us. As you know, it takes a lot of time to produce any type of content. So that would be one example of a potential hire. Maybe an analyst, someone to do data, both on the acquisitions and really the asset management side. It has quite a bit of data analytics to it as well. So that would probably be another position. I don't know. She may have additional ideas beyond that I don't know, but that's what comes to my mind.
Gotcha. So what does an average day for you look like? What is your schedule? What are your main duties that you're taking on
Yeah.
most days?
Yeah. So, I get that question from my friends a lot who, are still in the W-2 world. Dude, what do you do every day? And so I have a general like a color coded schedule. I try to kind of get it. Some of it's the same every week. Some of it I try to fill out at the beginning of the week to have some kind of balance. The truth is, particularly because I do a lot of acquisition stuff, there's a lot of kind of fire type situations, right? Like we're negotiating this contract this week, or we're raising for this deal this week, or we're closing on this deal in 2 weeks. Like those kinds of things, you get to a point like that on your schedule and it just sucks 90% of your time, right? Um, but outside of something odd like that, I try to spend, several hours a day blocked out working on acquisitions, which means talking to brokers, underwriting deals, looking at deals, studying markets. because that's one of my roles in our company. And I think you do need to have that sort of time block on that to make that happen. I'll spend time. I do a lot of stuff on social media, so I'll probably spend about an hour a day, engaging people, talking to people, whether that be investors or potential investors, writing content, responding to content. I do some of that, and then we still own the short term rental business that I mentioned. So I hire probably 90% of that out, but I still have a little bit of involvement in that a few days a week, and so I'll go do different projects or things for that business as well. But then one thing I try to be intentional about if we're outside of time where we have to really grind and crunch is like having the lifestyle that I want to have. So the reason that I went to the W-2 world was not so I could be worth $100 million someday. Not the W-2 world, excuse me. The entrepreneur world is not so I could have $100 million net worth one day, but so I could have the lifestyle I wanted. And so for me, that means things like I'm an endurance runner, triathlete, so I like to spend time going to the gym, riding my bike, running. My wife and I were very involved in our church that we go to. We like to do a lot of volunteer work, a lot of help there. So that's something important to me. I like to spend time with my family, with my friends. I like the idea that like, hey, during the middle of the week, if I want to just go do something, I can go do it. Like I don't have to ask permission. Um, so I try to remember why I started this business to begin with. And, even if it's in a smaller way now of what I want it to be one day, enjoy those benefits now.
Exactly. Well, we're almost out of time. I've got time for one more question for you. If you could go back in time and give advice to yourself, when would you go to and what advice would you give yourself?
So I'll give a funny answer than a real answer. The funny answer is I'd go back. I rented an apartment the first 4 years that I was out of university. I was single, lived there. I would go back and tell myself, dude, buy a house day one. Like I should have just bought it, house hacked it. I could be a few years down the road. So that's the funny answer. Um, you know, I think I may twist the answer a little bit, but one thing that really helped me feel comfortable when we made our first investment purchase, the fourplex that I mentioned, because I definitely had my share of fears and doubts, just like most any normal person would, was I was listening to a podcast. I think it was a Bigger Pockets one at this time. And basically the guy was talking about like, I don't want to be on my deathbed one day and have regrets. Like, I don't want to look back on my life and be like, what if I had taken this risk or done this or tried this? Like, I don't want that in my life in any area. And I think if I could have heard that several years sooner, it definitely would have like propelled my success in real estate and really just kind of like things in life in general. Just an understanding that like what I was searching for was like a fulfilled life, a life of meaning. And, you don't get that by, always playing it safe, by doing what everyone else does, by going with the flow. Those are not the ways you get that kind of life. And so I wish I could have heard that about, several, really many years, but several years before I did.
Yeah, that's always a good one and even if you know it and you forget about it, it's nice to hear it again because it does just light a fire under you. It's like
Yeah.
everything that you've been putting off. Why are you putting, okay, what's actually important? What are
Yeah.
the most important things that you should be focusing on that future you is going to be proud that you handled then and there, right?
It cracks me up kind of just to bolster that argument. Now that I've been in investing for several years, there are a lot of people who were, let's call them newbie investors when I started, residential and multifamily alike. And now sometimes I look and say, okay, of the people I remember, some of them I've forgotten about because they're just no longer in the picture. But the ones that I remember and that are successful today, they're not always the ones that had the most money. They're not the ones that were the smartest. They're not the ones that you necessarily would have like put your money on. They're just the ones that were like, I'm going to win. Like like there's no option. I'm gonna win and I'm not gonna quit until I do. And so, if you wonder what does it take to be successful in this industry or anything in life, it's really that I would call it grit, that determination of just I'm gonna do what it takes until I get there. So
Boom. That is a perfect place to end the podcast. Jonathan, thank you so much for being a guest today. It was an incredible episode. Everyone's going to love it. Thank you so much for your time.
thanks, Cory. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to the latest episode of the Mastering Commercial Real Estate podcast. This was Jonathan Nichols. Jonathan, where can everybody find you?
Yeah, you can check out our website. It's Apogee MFC, like multifamilycapital.com. We got a lot of stuff on there. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so feel free to add me there and shoot me a message.
Perfect. Check the show notes, everybody. I'm your host, Cory Mortensen. We'll see you next time.